Thank you. Thank you, Stephen, and thanks to the Hilton Foundation for inviting me here this evening. And I have to tell you, I'm especially pleased to be able to congratulate the recipient of this year's Conrad and Hilton Humanitarian Prize, Handicap International. Really, congratulations. The assistance that this organization provides to those acutely affected by conflict and disaster, disease and poverty offers inspiration as well as guidance to all of us seeking to empower those who are most vulnerable. And it is heartening to see the response to people with disabilities is beginning to change in many countries in terms of their everyday life as well as in crisis situation. And I saw this in Haiti last year after the earthquake, where many people who had limbs crushed and amputated were still able to get around. Handicap International teams made a point of going to the poorest neighborhoods to distribute walking aids and other forms of care. And as I think Jean-Baptiste mentioned, and Alphonse told him, I was a little bit more than a week ago in Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya, and I could see the work, the wonderful work they are doing there. So really, it's an honor for me to be here tonight with all of you. As you saw in the video in 2008, the UN Convention of the Rights of a Person with Disability came into force. And it marks a paradigm shift in that it views persons with disability not only as objects of relief, but as subjects with rights, capable of claiming those rights and making decisions for their lives as active members of society. Intended as a human rights instrument with a social development dimension, it thus commands the attention of all UN agencies, including UN Women. The need to reach people who otherwise might be overlooked, not only in humanitarian operations, but also in development programming, is also high on the UN agenda, including, of course, UN Women, as we seek to accelerate progress on gender equality and women's rights. And I want to share with you this evening my thinking about the creation of UN Women and how we can meet the high expectations to see meaningful change in the lives of women and girls. In creating UN Women, which consolidates 4 smaller and underfunded agencies, UN member states recognized that if advancing gender equality is to accelerate progress on all development goals, then something needs to be done to speed up the slow pace of change. In creating UN Women, they signal that gender equality and women's rights are on a par with other global imperatives, such as ending poverty and hunger and combating climate change. And we know that UN Women cannot do this alone. We will need to build strong partnerships with all parts of the United Nations systems, as well as with governments, civil society, private sector, foundations, and the media, to ensure that we can bring about a turning point for gender equality and women's rights in all countries. And as you all know, the challenge we face are considerable. The huge gaps in wealth and income that have accompanied global growth have deepened with the economic crisis, driving down wages, cutting job prospects, and pushing millions more people into poverty and insecurity. Political conflict and natural disasters are again threatening food security in many parts of the world, straining household coping strategies. This does not have to be the case. Policymakers can be persuaded that things can be managed better so that we can keep our countries safe and our economies prospering by advancing women's economic and political empowerment and guaranteeing their safety. And this priority should be at the top of all our lists, not just UN Women's. I always say we are all UN Women. As I said on my arrival at the UN late last year, and this is very ridiculous, but I will quote myself. The words that we hear after many high-level events, that gender equality and women's empowerment are goals in their own right and central to all other goals, must be more than a mantra. It must become a lived reality in all countries. End of my own quote. Well, we're starting to see some hope. Women's economic empowerment has already caught the interest of several key players, including corporations and the media, as well as government officials. The World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Report shows that across 134 countries, greater gender equality correlates positively with a GNP per capita. A study of Fortune 500 companies found that those with 3 or more women board members outperform others by 53%. If somebody didn't realize, what I'm trying to sell here is that by giving women more space and more power, more opportunity, is a win-win response. The World Bank and others have shown that in all countries where women have access to good education, good job, land, and other assets, there is stronger growth, lower maternal mortality, greater food security, and less risk of HIV and AIDS. This is the kind of thing that makes government pay attention. And let me be clear, economic empowerment is not just about harnessing women to economic growth. We know that women who earn their own income can also challenge the way household decisions are made and demand the right to be free from violence. But too many women remain economically marginalized. In some regions, 60 to 80% of women workers are in vulnerable jobs with no benefits, low pay, and often no pay at all. Empowering women economically is therefore a key priority for UN Women. I really believe that there won't be any women's right. They won't be really effective if women don't have economic autonomy. So that's why we are putting so much effort in this. And also because we know that when women have salary, have their own incomes, they are always ensuring food security, buying textbooks for their children, helping their own family and their own community. And one is, for us, is a key priority, and one in which we will pull the UN system together. We must combine our talents and resources to make this a reality. We must work together to support women's economic autonomy, including opportunities for good jobs and asset building, and the extension of social protection to all workers, including migrant workers. It is not acceptable that millions of people, including more than 600 million women, are living on less than $1.25 a day, and millions more make too little money to lift themselves and their families above national poverty line. And when we're talking about economic empowerment, we're thinking on a very broad range of things, from women as workers, migrant or non-migrant workers, so they can have minimal, I would say, dignified jobs, from women who can be entrepreneurs, from micro, small, or medium entrepreneurs, so they can have access to credits, so they can have access to technology transfer, so they can have access to communication technology, so they can have access, in the case of urban women, to all of this, but in the case of rural women's, rural livelihoods, we need to ensure them water supply, storage supply, so they can really not only produce good products as they do, but they can storage it and have also better conditions to go to the markets, to negotiate better prices. We need to give them technical transfer, we need to give them managerial skills, and we need to help them get access to markets. Thank you very much. It's water. But also, when we're talking about economic empowerment of women, we're also thinking on how we can improve gender parity at boards and also at senior positions. So because we believe really that women can make a great contribution. But if we were saying that it's so important that women can have a very important participation on the economy, we also believe it's important that women's voices are heard. And that's why another priority is how we enhance the voice of the women, their leadership, their participation. So one of the areas is how we involve women in politics. And when I'm talking about political participation, I'm talking a wide range of issues, not only on political parties. I'm talking about women at grassroots organizations, women at local governments, women in parliaments, but also women in trade unions, and of course, women who can be candidates for all kinds of position. And I believe it's a basic prerequisite for women's empowerment, as well as for a genuine democracy. When we think that in many countries, women are at least the half of the society, to the voice of the women, if they are heard, if they are really well represented, it will be a much more solid democracy. It facilitates women's direct engagement in public decision-making and helps to strengthen government transparency and accountability. And while progress in this area has been glacial, today there are 19 women head of state of government, if we think on the 192 member states of the United Nations. That means a little bit less than 10%. And if you think on women's representation in elected legislature, the Beijing's goal was that in order to put interesting legislature that will increase and improve women's condition, you need at least 30%, a critical mass of 30% female parliamentarians. This goal is only was able to achieve it in 28 countries in the world, half of them in the developing world. 30% is widely viewed as the critical mass needed to bring about positive change. So it is possible that in this area too we will soon reach a turning point. And women are eager to take on this role. As we see in the Arab states region, women who once stayed out of the public arena are now standing alongside men to demand the right to participate in revitalizing their societies, including running for office and participating in constitutional reform processes. And I met with some of them during my recent visit to Cairo, and their determination and courage should be an inspiration to all of us to demand better. And I have to tell you that yesterday a wonderful thing happened in Tunisia, because they voted and decided that in the Constituent Assembly that will be elected to produce the new constitution, they decided that the principle will be parity. They will have 50% members female and 50% male. And that, I think, that's a really historical step. But another urgent challenge, and one where we are finally seeing some momentum for change, is ending violence against women and girls, which is endemic in all countries. And countries are starting not only to understand that this is the most pervasive human rights violation, but it also implies costs for the countries. In the US, for example, costs run an estimated of $500.8 billion a year in extra health and mental health care and lost productivity. In Canada, with a much smaller population and lower healthcare costs, the total is still $1.16 billion. And in Australia, just a recent survey showed it costs $13.6 billion a year. So this is a wake-up call to governments and corporations in all countries. We need to demand a standard set of questions on gender violence be part of all national service, so that no country can say they didn't know the scope of the problem because they didn't have the data. Politicians then need to take action. They need to enforce the laws against domestic violence that now exist in over 130 countries. And UN Women will provide the basic packages of services for countries to respond, such as by setting up hotlines and shelters providing care for survivors, and police protection for those at risk. The ravage of gender violence are especially horrible in conflict situations. The blurring of the lines between the battlefield and the home front in many of today's conflicts means that civilians are increasingly targeted and women are singled out for sexual violence and abuse. And we have all seen the headlines, the systematic rape and violence in conflict that spills over into families and communities when the gun falls silent. And UN Women makes clear that women are not only victims of violence, they are also agents of conflict resolution when they get the chance. And we found that in 24 peace processes over the past 2 decades, women form less than 8% of negotiating teams, with the result that women's concerns are almost entirely missing from peace agreements. Here, too, there is a momentum for change. Rape is now recognized and punished as a war crime or a crime against humanity, depending on the circumstances. And the Security Council now recognizes sexual violence in conflict not only as a humanitarian issue, but also as a security issue, one which they have the responsibility to prevent. But much more is needed from all of us. And UN Women could not have happened without the women's rights advocates, including many in governments, who worked for its formation for nearly 4 years. But as many of them have said, they could not have done it without the support of governments, foundations, and NGO allies. So in addition to saying that it's time to get serious about women's rights, it is time to stress the power of partnership. And in developing the first UN Women Action Plan, we therefore put partnership at the center, because working together we're not only more comprehensive, bringing knowledge and ideas from civil society, foundations, and the private sector to tackle challenges holistically, but we're also more powerful, working from all angles to create the kind of momentum that can really make a difference in the lives of women and girls. And to get the results we know are possible, UN Women needs to strengthen our own capacity and that of our partners in every country where we work. And we also need to strengthen the women's rights groups in all countries, because change comes about fastest when a whole range of forces are working from different angles, from bottom up as well as top down. So that's my call, is to work together in terms of being of all these people who I believe there's so diversity here in this room, but there's something in common. It's all people who care, who really care. And that's why we all, I'm convinced, can work together thinking what else we can do to ensure women and girls in the world a better world to live. I would say that we are also working with the private sector partners as an active development partner. UN Women is currently partnering with the UN Global Compact to promote the women's empowerment principles, a global corporate code of conduct for empowering women in the workplace, marketplace, and community. It calls on companies to ensure that women represent at least 30% of decision-making groups, guarantee equal pay, provide flexible work options, and adopt a zero-tolerance policy on sexual harassment. And to date, over 185 heads of companies from every region of the world have signed the CEO statement of support. The promotion of this principle is helping to foster collaboration with businesses, governments, and civil society in more and more countries. But we know there is much more that can be done. And I think together, all of us who care, we need to find a way to harness our energies, the knowledge and wealth created in countries like this one, and channel it to those who are still left out, so that we can make this a turning point for women, men, boys, and girls in all population groups and in every country. Because working in partnership, I know we will succeed. Thank you very much.